Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and start. We're going to talk a lot about alternative assessments. And really, the purpose of this is to look at, okay, how can alternative assessment be used in your classroom? So it's not going to be this prescriptive, this is what alternative assessment must be used as, but really for you to think through, okay, how can I make the transition from a more traditional assessment test-based course to looking at what alternative assessment can do for me and hopefully a little bit of playing around. So let's understand what alternative assessment is. Grant Wiggins wrote this phenomenal book in 1998. I forget the title already, but he has some very clear delineation of what makes an alternative assessment. And so often when we talk about it, people have this very prescriptive viewpoint that any alternative assessment has to be X, Y, and Z. It has to be a project, when really there is a lot of other ways that we can embrace alternative assessment. So let's take a look at the definition first. Alternative assessment is simply a non-traditional method to evaluate the skills and knowledge in more authentic context. So when you boil it down, that's what it is. And what Wiggins said is that it should be realistic. It requires judgment and innovation of both of mainly the student, but you as an instructor has to have a little bit of innovation as well when you're embracing this new type. Ask the students to do the subject. And I love the way that he phrases this because it's not just memorize the subject. You are doing it, you are living it, you are practicing something in that. It replicates or simulates the context in which adults are tested, and you see those quotes, in the workplace. So again, it's this application of the skills that a student is going to need in whatever workplace, personal, civic lifestyle. They're actually doing those skills in real life. Assess the student's ability to efficiently and effectively use a repertoire of knowledge and skills to negotiate a complex task. Come on, this is what we really want our students to do. We want them to be able to think critically. We want them to take, I know this in my brain. I know these facts. I'm going to take these facts, I'm going to manipulate them, and I'm going to apply them to a task that is requiring me to think critically. That really boils down what our hope is for our students when they get the skills and that knowledge in our course. And then allows appropriate opportunities to rehearse, practice, consult resource, and get feedback on and refine performances and products. And this to me is a really key piece of it because it's one that when people start implementing authentic assessments, it gets left off a lot of the times. And I'm a huge advocate for this part of it because that is what real life is you take something, you try something, you get the opportunity to say, hey, that didn't work. I'm going to refine it. I'm going to do better. And then you improve on it. There's very few things, except if you're a surgeon, and that I do it, I implement these skills and it's failed, something horrible happens. So we get the opportunity in our work and our personal and our civic to make those enhancements and to do better next time. It's not just I failed it like we have in our traditional setting. So we want to build in those feedback opportunities when we implement these authentic assessments. So at the core, it's really this focusing on the real world application, thinking critically, not just about the rote memorization that we have often in a traditional assessment type of format. And the benefits, I hope that that's really bled through when I'm talking about it, is it's this deeper learning that you're promoting and enabling your students to do that is accommodating naturally a diverse learning style, and it helps your students become engaged because they are doing things that matter to them. Remember, they are doing the subject. Key points, really, I covered this in the previous slide, but it's relevant to the real world that students are going to be moving into. I hate when people say, I'm training my students for the real world when they're talking about policies, late penalties, those types of things. But when we're talking about it in the context of authentic assessments, that is the real world relevance that I really love to hear. I am helping them to practice the skills they're going to use in the real world of their job and the real world of their employment. So that's to me the most appropriate way to apply those terms. There's a multidimensional evaluation. So you're looking at a range of skills. It's not just one, it's not just rote memorization or regurgitating facts. You're looking at a student's ability to think critically, to solve problems, perhaps to collaborate, which is a huge part that's missing in a lot of those workplace skills that students need to grow in. And again, not just the recall of facts. you're helping them to become more engaged in their subject, because a key piece of authentic assessment is allowing students to explore and find a way that they're using that subject knowledge in a way that is interesting and engaging to them. That feedback, we're going to look a little bit on the process of building rubrics, but that continuous feedback is a really important part of an authentic assessment. As students get to do it, you provide the feedback and they get to redo it. Authentic assessments are innately diverse in how a student is able to represent knowledge in a way that's personal and applicable to them. So you're really meeting that need of a student right then and there by allowing them different ways to show their knowledge through that authentic assessment format. Okay. The most typical types of alternative assessment that you're going to see, but I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this because these are just the most typical. It's not the only way, but it's going to be a portfolio. This is where we see it in a lot of like arts-based programs. And using project-based, but a lot of people will want to stop there when they look at authentic assessment. And really that's just one way to do authentic assessment. We're going to explore how you can do authentic assessment in your courses as well towards the end. Okay. Oh, and I forgot to say, if there's any questions, please interrupt me. I know I present like I'm on a steam engine, but don't wait for me to take a breath, raise your hand, interrupt, put something in the chat. The wonderful, amazing Lori Levine is here to help me monitor chat if I miss it. So please feel free to interrupt or interject at any time. A key piece of getting started on your authentic assessment journey is to really look at those learning outcomes. Now, I'm not just saying this because I'm the SLO coordinator at my college. I really firmly believe this is where all of our design thinking really needs to start. We have to start with, what is it that I want my students to know? I spent so many years when I first started teaching just saying, okay, I'm just going to take my textbook and this is what students need to know because I'm sure the textbook author knows, right? Instead of sitting and looking at my course outline of record, looking at those objectives, looking at the outcomes, looking at what I know my students need to meet those outcomes. What skills and knowledge should they demonstrate at the end of instruction? Now, whether that's at the end of the unit, at the end of the course, at the end of the assessment, you really have to start with, okay, what is it that I want them to know, and make sure that that is measurable. And then you choose the assessment method. Okay, so if this is what I want students to know, what are the best ways for them to demonstrate them? How can I measure those learning outcomes? So often we'll say, this is what I want students to know. And then when I challenge instructors, but how would I measure that? They aren't a measurable things. They just become, I want them to, and now it's escaping me. Understand is measurable, but it's a more difficult thing. I want them to understand this. Well, what does that look like? What are they doing to show you that they understand that? So once we decide, okay, what is the assessment method that I'm going to use in order for students to demonstrate those learning outcomes, then I have to develop the criteria. This is another step that gets skipped because we create these really great assessments, even if we're all on board with the thought of alternative assessments. We forget that developing those criteria for students to be able to say, okay, this is what it looks like when I've achieved proficiency or when I've demonstrated that I know those, we skip that and we just push out the assignment and then let students figure it out. So we want to develop the criteria, and this is often detailed rubrics that outline the expectations. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a clear delineation at each different level of proficiency. I was a huge advocate when I first started teaching with alternative assessment of the 1-point rubric. And this is what proficiency looks like. So if that's what you want to start with and say, okay, if you demonstrate proficiency in these skills, in these outcomes, then this is what it looks like, and just have that middle column. And then you can write in your comments on either side of those. And we'll talk a little bit more when we look at rubrics and feedback in just a second. You want to provide a place to use those rubrics and provide constructive and meaningful feedback, and then allow a student to resubmit to show you that they've demonstrated that proficiency. I know you think you came to just something on learning about different assessments, but that opportunity to resubmit the assessment is really a key part of making sure this is a real world application. They can do that alternative assessment, look at your feedback, and then resubmit to get where they need to be at that skill proficiency. That's really an important piece of alternative assessments. Any questions so far? How are we doing? Good? Okay. Okay. So what are some of the pieces of developing effective rubrics? And we'll take a look at AI and how AI is a fantastic aid in doing this when we're playing around too at the end. So when you're developing effective rubrics, you want to have clear criteria. So you're defining specific observable behaviors or qualities for each level of performance. So if that's just what proficient looks like, if that's just that 1 point rubric, then that's where that clear criteria is. And you want to be as specific as possible so that students know here's what the expectations are. And again, this is a really great way to use AI. And I think we should have time to be able to demonstrate that in a little bit. Those descriptive levels, so the precise language, if you want to be very clear what proficient looks like, what almost proficient, what not proficient looks like, then make sure there is clear delineation between each of those levels. This is why for me, it was easier to start with the 1 point rubric, because it was very difficult as I started out with the alternative assessment, and this is before AI helped me to clarify those thoughts. But it was much easier for me to sit and think, okay, what would proficient look like? What are the skills that I expect to see? And then as students submitted their work, I would be able to say, okay, this is how it exceeds proficiency, and be able to write those comments because it became clear to me, or this is what was lacking. But students would know, okay, this is where I need to be for proficient. That part was clear, but I could write the comments in then on that 1 point rubric of these are the elements that are missing that weren't able to get you to that demonstration of proficiency. And then make sure that the rubric criteria aligns clearly to those learning outcomes. And this seems like it's a given, and maybe you all are just smarter than me, but I realized some of my rubrics didn't really align with what I wanted my students to learn. And so this is where it was a really great thing to check. And again, I know some people are super opposed to AI to support their teaching, but this was a really great objective way that I've been using to check and see, okay, are these rubrics that I'm building aligning with this assignment? And if they don't, tell me how. So we'll play around with that a little bit as well. Okay, so if you are thinking, all right, I'm not necessarily all in with this whole alternative assessment thing, but you've convinced me enough that I want to give it a try. So what are some ways that I can use alternative assessment, maybe not holistically in everything that I do, but what are some reasons that I can consider it for some assessment? So think about if there's things that use more complex skills. So if it's something very simple, like, yeah, they simply need to memorize these. Yeah, maybe a simple test or diagram fill in, maybe that's all that it needs. But if a skill that you're expecting them to develop is of a higher order, if it's requiring critical thinking, problem solving, or creative thinking, this is where an alternative assessment might be a better fit. If there's something where, hey, this is a skill that I can really see a great practical, real world scenario that it would work, then it would be a great thing to transition into an alternative assessment. So a great way to think about this is if a student were to come up to you and say, how can I use this in the real world? Why is this important? Why do I need to know this? And you can come up with a real world application for it. Then an alternative assessment is a really great place to start in assessing that skill, because you've just given them, this is how you're going to use it in the real world. So why not authentically assess them then if you're saying that? if you have a task where you're saying, you know what, this is going to be hard for the different ways a student might process information. How am I going to have accommodations for this way? Having alternative assessment allows for a student to display their knowledge in ways that are a better fit for them. If you're really trying to dive into alternative assessment, then allowing students different ways to submit that assignment and not being prescriptive, if it's a PowerPoint, a video, or a brochure, whatever it might be, not being prescriptive and saying this is exactly how you have to submit this, allows students that expression in ways that match their various learning styles and abilities. And it also allows that long-term growth. So if you want to see them growing over a period of time, like if this is a skill that is going to arc across your entire course, then an alternative assessment might give them that opportunity to do that, especially since we know it's important to have them submit it, you assess it, and then have them submit it again. Questions? No? Okay. So how then do we implement alternative assessments? First, we need to define those clear objectives and then choosing those assessment methods. Okay, we talked about that extensively. So if you don't have those clear objectives on your curriculum outline of record, this is where it can be really great to take and do a little bit of mapping, take a little bit of time and say, all right, here are my student learning outcomes. What are the objectives? What are the skills that each of these outcomes that a student would need to develop in order to clearly demonstrate these outcomes? And then what assessment methods are going to tell me if a student has become proficient in those skills or are going to demonstrate these outcomes? And then we're going to prepare. So create that detailed instructions, rubrics, and gather necessary resources. And we're going to play around a little bit with AI in order to create those detailed instructions, because it's a fantastic way to get to a really clear and meaningful authentic assessment. And then you're going to implement, so you're going to guide students through the process. This can be really hard for students when you first start to implement them. So many of our students have come up through a much more traditional educational system that when we first ask them to make the transition into a more creative form of thinking, where how they're submitting it isn't overly prescriptive, it can be a little bit difficult. It's like that Piaget disequilibrium where students are learning and they're growing and you're stretching them in really great ways, but it is really unnerving. They want to know the word count. They want to know how many paragraphs. They want to know how many pages. In an authentic assessment, these aren't the types of things that are prescriptive. What you're very detail oriented in is this is the skills that I am hoping to see you demonstrate. And these are some ways that you might be able to demonstrate it. You're giving those suggestions, but you're not overly prescriptive in the different ways that they're going to implement those skills. And then evaluate. So then you're going to assess a student work using those rubrics, and you're going to offer that constructive feedback. So then they can start the process over again and submit. So this does sound like a lot of work, and I'm not going to lie, it can be more work at the beginning than just getting that test bank from the publisher or wherever it might be, having them complete that Canvas quiz that's auto-graded. This can be at the beginning a little bit more work to set up, but it is so much more fun to grade. And it really, for me, it's why I got into teaching. I wanted to support students in getting to that getting into the discipline that I had fallen in love with. And so it really brought that joy back to me. So you want to start, if you have these time constraints and saying, oh my goodness, I don't know how I'm going to do this, maybe start with one or two things. Think about those outcomes where that do demand students to have those more complex skills set. And you think, okay, I know that this test, this whatever traditional assessment isn't capturing the complexity of the skills that I want them to show me. That's a great way to look at and implement that authentic assessment. Like I said in the previous slide, there is going to be a little bit of student resistance. This is harder than having to just memorize facts and fill out a test. This is forcing critical thinking, not just on the student's part, but on your part as well as an instructor. How am I going to design an assessment that's going to really support those skills? So you want to be clear, and this is where it gets back. If you haven't heard of the TILT framework, I won't go into it, but you want to be clear and transparent about the purpose of this assignment. Why am I making you to do it? What are the tasks that I want you to do? And what is the purpose I'm asking you to do those tasks? That is a really key element that we can forget about in a lot of our assessments. And there's really no place to even put it when we just have a multiple choice test. And you want to eliminate the subjectivity concerns. Because this isn't as cut and dry as a multiple choice test, there is a lot of opportunity for subjectivity to creep into our assessment. So this is where you really want those rubrics to be very clear so that you know when you're grading it, you have that set of criteria. And I guarantee as you start to use this form of assessment, you're going to be revising those rubrics many times during the first couple of semesters of an assessment because maybe it wasn't being captured. And that is another reason why I liked starting with that 1 point rubric, because it gave me an option to, if I wasn't clear about what proficiency wasn't, I would be able to write it in instead of being locked into a rubric because I hadn't figured out, okay, I know what proficient is, but what does it look like if it's not proficient in that skill? Some of the ways that moving over to an alternative assessment can be helpful. It in supporting diverse learners, and this is where some of those UDL concepts come into play, is you have a flexible option. So there's multiple ways for students to demonstrate their skill and knowledge. It doesn't mean that you can't be prescriptive. If you want them to do a video, then you can have them do a video, and you don't want to give them other options, but they still have a lot of flexibility in how they're going to be demonstrating in a video. And so you're still meeting those needs. It allows for scaffolding. So you can provide the appropriate support and resources as they're making the journey through that alternative assessment. It's not, again, where they're sitting down and filling out that multiple choice test and there's no opportunity for you to scaffold them. They've got this more comprehensive assessment project that they can get the support through the many steps that assessment is going to be. There's more opportunity for cultural relevance because they're taking those that end product, those outcomes that you're saying, I want you to demonstrate in this alternative assessment and making it authentic to them so they can find a way that is respectful and incorporating their unique cultural perspective in what their output is and how they're demonstrating that proficiency. And then you also want to make sure that all of the content that you are creating is accessible for all students with disabilities. And sometimes this can be a little bit more difficult to think through if you're designing an assessment that has multiple different elements. It sometimes can be simpler to just make a multiple choice test fully screen reader accessible. So as you get more creative in designing these alternative assessments, you want to make sure that you're also thinking through how would different students with different abilities demonstrate this knowledge. Oh, I'm going to skip to that because I meant to take that out because we're going to do some experimenting. So what are some best practices? Again, make sure you have ongoing feedback, so that opportunity to allow a student to resubmit. You incorporate options for them to reflect on it. That's where some of that critical thinking can come even at the end. So they're going to have a process. They're going to grow in the process of submitting that alternative assessments. I love giving the option of students to reflect on that at the end. So what did you learn in that process? That's where that metacognition can come into, that thinking about their thinking about what they're learning in that process of completing that alternative assessment. And again, be willing to adjust the assessment based on the student needs and feedback. This is one of those things where it can get really uncomfortable for us as a teacher because it returns us almost back to that first year of teaching where I don't know if you felt it, but it felt like everything went wrong. It was, oh my goodness, I can't believe how bad I was. This is going to take a couple of iterations to really get in the groove of assessing those outcomes. Especially the first time you implement this for an assignment, it can really feel like you missed the mark as you're reading through those assignments going, oh my goodness, they're not doing what I thought it would be. Now, I will say that as I've used AI more to troubleshoot and say, what are some of the questions students are going to have? What are the concerns? What is missing in these tasks? Then I've been able to design a much better assessment when I'm doing this for a new skill or outcome for a new class than I previously had when I didn't have a thought partner to work with me through those types of questions that I might have. There is lots of really great websites that are out there that talk a lot about authentic assessment. I just gathered a couple. The first three, I think, I should have put them. I think it's the first three have faculty spotlights and a lot of different disciplines listed that can walk you through. Here are some authentic assessments that might work for this class. But I also have found the best, most creative way for me to come up with authentic assessments is to have a conversations with AI. But in case you're opposed to AI and you don't want to use it for whatever reason, then these websites, the first three, if not, you can do all of them, and I can send you these links as well. Have faculty spotlights and different disciplines highlighted that implement different types of alternative assessments in their course.
Yeah, would you be able to like drop those in the chat or something, or
I think so.
we can't open them here. The links.
Let's see. Oh, nope, I'm over the limit here. Let me do the first. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's then take a look and do a little bit of hands-on experimentation with AI. But first, are there any questions that people might have? I'm going to ask you to start out with a discipline. Well, I'd like to get examples from you guys. I mean, I've got my own, but sometimes people don't always like to always rely on just child development examples. So if anybody else has a subject or an outcome that we want to think about creating authentic assessments, let's walk through what this would look like thought partnering with AI. Because really, to me, it's been the best way for me to creatively think of different authentic assessments for my class. I teach child development, so I'm sure it's much easier for me than a lot of other subjects to find ways for them to authentically create, for me to create authentic assessments. So what are some subjects?
Well, I have some that I'd like to let other people go if they wanted to. Okay, well,
Well, a CTE would be a good example. For example, creating
yeah,
a
so
lab assessment.
yeah, so give me a subject. So CTE, it yields much more naturally to alternative assessment, but let's have a conversation with AI and see what it comes up with. So
How about,
give me a skill or
sorry.
something you would want them to learn. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mohammed.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No. I was gonna say maybe how to inspect a gas turbine engine.
Okay.
Maybe a broad
Perfect.
subject, but that's
yeah,
just
no,
me.
that's fine. Let's see what it comes up with. So whenever I'm working with an AI, I like to give it a little bit of context. So I would say, I let them know I'm a community college instructor in California. I want to create an authentic assessment for students to demonstrate their knowledge. So let's see, Mohammed, what subject do you teach? So gas turbine engine, I'm thinking AMT.
That's correct.
Okay. I teach aircraft maintenance. Oh my goodness. Good thing AI doesn't care about spelling, huh? That'd be embarrassing. Oh. We'll just let it be wrong. Okay, maintenance. And I want to create an authentic assessment for inspecting, oops, a gas turbine engine. Now we can stop at a prompt like this, but you're going to get everything across the board. So we want to narrow it down a little bit as far as what are some of the other delimiters that we want to give. So say I want them to demonstrate this in the course of 6 weeks, in a 6-week class. So let's see, this needs, and how much hours you expect students to devote to it. So this needs to be an assessment that takes them, I don't know, what, 10 hours? What would be a good expectation, Mohammed?
That'll be, say, 3 days.
Okay,
About,
3 days to complete?
yeah.
Okay, well, let's just see what it comes up with. Sometimes it can be fun just to plug it in and then you can see what happens. And so here we say, it says, okay, we wanted an authentic assessment that takes 3 days to complete. And so we've got this 3 days worth of assessments for students to demonstrate. And it does a great job because you've said, I want an authentic assessment. It's going to tell you, okay, here are the objectives for each task. Because that was, remember those key parts, students need to know what is the assessment, what is the purpose of the assessment? What is the objective, what I'm doing? And so we have it telling us, okay, here are some tasks that each of the students that they need to possibly do in order to, I already forgot, to inspect a gas turbine engine. And now we can change something. I know this is putting you on the
Wow,
spot,
this is
Mohammed, but
great.
what would we change?
Let's focus. So we kind of divide this inspection into maybe a 2-section. It's called cold section of the engine and the hot section of the engine. And then some of the major components at that point. But this is very good. I see some of these are very close to what we have our lab assessment created, where we do, for example, the paperwork or the research on the engine first. So we look at a lot of technical bulletins, we look at some of the safety bulletins and airworthiness directives that FAA has implemented. So this is really good guideline.
Yeah, and you can
Okay.
plug in different elements. So if you already have an
Yeah.
assessment that you like, you can put it in there and say, hey, I have this assessment. These are the parts that I like. These are the parts that I don't. Can you make it more authentic so students aren't just
Right.
doing it, whatever it might be? And so we've simply said, all right, I divide the inspection into 2 sections, a cold section and a hot section.
Right.
And so they've done that. And this is the part that I really like, is I can tell it, all right, create a detailed rubric I would use as the evaluator, perhaps. So let's see what it comes up with.
Oh man, why didn't I think of these before?
And here's the key thing is you want to make sure and tell it to put it in a table if you want it in a table. Now, if you want it in a checklist format, you can do it too. But let's just see what it looks like in a table. And let's just tell it we want it in a detailed table. 4 points. Let's see, skill not demonstrated at the bottom, and then exceeds proficiency at the top. And again, I love AI because I don't have to spell things correctly. And so now we have a rubric that we can start basing our assessments off of. Now, we want to, as discipline experts, we never want to take something that AI spits out, but I've found that the more I have a conversation with it, it gets pretty good where I'm doing just minor tweaks, especially with if I do good on explaining what the course is. But here's one of my favorite parts when I'm trying to create an authentic assessment is I tell it, what are some of the questions that students might have? And this is where I get these really great assignments because I'll go through them. And this is where that human element comes on creating a really good assessment is I'll go through and answer these questions. And I am not at the capacity to answer these, so I'm not even going to pretend. But you could go through then and say, all right, and all you have to do is put one and answer the question. What specific manuals or technical documents should I review for the inspection? So you're looking at this from a student's perspective. And as you go through, and integrate those answers, it's going to create an even better and more authentic assessment for students.
Wow, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Okay.
All right, we've got like 10 minutes for another example. Who has another one? Lori, you want to give one of yours a try?
Well, part of, I mean, I teach English, and part of the issue is it's writing papers, right? But like, I'm gonna do a creative project with the students, but I'd like to do something like a little bit different. Like, how else can we assess writing thesis statements, or which is just like sort of one skill that's, when you do that, it's kind of divorced from the rest of it's out of context. But I would love something else that's sort of more, or how can we assess like critical thinking with I don't know, or even doing research or something. You know what I'm saying? It's writing papers, but is there something else?
So what skill first do you want to assess? So we say, I teach first year English and want to find a way to assess critical thinking by formulating thesis statements or what?
Well, I mean, at the end of the semester, they're supposed to be able to write a well-researched, documented essay or paper, so part of it, the objectives are, do they have a clear thesis? Do they have, examples, topic sentences, things like that? But is there another way of, I mean, we have to have them write papers, but is there something else that they can do too?
So for me, I start with a conversation because I don't know what I don't know. And AI can be a really great resource. So I teach first year English and want to find a way to assess critical thinking through students creating a well-researched paper. I'm worried about their use of AI and I want to have a creative way they can build this skill. Do you have any suggestions? Well, let's see what it comes up with. And here is where you can start having that conversation. So research log, students maintain a detailed log, and let's actually go say,
I'm actually
big fan.
doing that as more of a metacognitive activity where then they have to write it up.
So, and I'm going to say, because we didn't tell it, I started a new chat that we wanted these to be authentic assessments. So let's see if they have any other ideas. So I told it I'm a big fan of authentic assessment. Can you make these suggestions more in line with authentic assessment? So research portfolio with real world applications, have students create a research portfolio where they gather sources and develop a comprehensive analysis on a topic relevant to their field of interest or community issues, community engagement project, case study analysis, peer consultancy report, interview-based research paper, policy proposal paper. And I'm going to say these seem really boring.
Like, I want something creative.
And here is where I like AI because you can't offend it. So if you were to say this to a peer that gave you suggestions, they'd probably be a little bit offended to say, those are kind of boring and stale. So these seems boring. And here's where words matter. So I always love the word reimagine because it makes it think creatively. reimagine your suggestions, so students will have more fun. Will enjoy them more.
And
But
I've enjoyed grading
I
them.
really want them to be based on real world application. Let's see what it comes up with. Podcast creation, interactive social media campaign. So you can see now by saying, hey, think more creatively, it does think more creatively. So you have to go back and forth. Debate show format, interactive workshop or community class, journalistic feature. So I like escape room design. So let's say,
Yeah, I know some people who do that, but I know what an escape room is. I just don't know how you do that.
so give me a skill, the skill of writing a thesis application, a thesis statement with this idea. So now we have where it's talking about creating that escape room. Create the full assignment. What questions do I need to answer? You always want to ask it, what questions do I need to answer in order for you to create this assignment? Every single time I've taken the time to do that, it's created a more robust assignment. And I can see those responses very clearly integrated in that. So learning objective, scope and depth, format, individual versus group work, resources and support, assessment criteria, duration, peer interaction, reflection, technology integration. So when people say that using AI is just taking the work out of being a teacher, it really isn't, because this is still work. I am just able to engage with this this thought partner that's pulling out all of these ideas instead of them being stuck in my head or me trying to think through, oh my goodness, what are all of the different questions that a student might have because I didn't clearly design an assignment. And you get to the point where it's a much more clearly articulated assignment by doing that. And you have that back and forth. And I don't want to take the time to do all of this. So I'm just going to pop over and show you this back and forth. Let's see what it happens. Let's see. I think let's see, sorry, I thought I had saved it in my chat, but okay, here we go. So here is where I was trying to think yesterday of a more authentic assessment for language development. I teach an infant toddler class, and students need to support the language developments of infants and toddlers. It seems easy to create an authentic assessment, but the one I had created in the previous semester, it had fallen stale. I wasn't really getting at the skills. So you start with, let's see, you can see the back and forth. I'm trying to get to so again, what students might have. So here is where, let's see, sorry. Oh, looks like my chat got cut up. All right, sorry. So somehow my chat disappeared. So you have what questions might students have about this assignment? Oh no, I lied because it's right here. So this is the very simple assignment that I had started with. As an infant toddler teacher, supporting language development is an integral part of your daily responsibilities. To assess your understanding of the outcomes listed below, I would like you to create training or support material for a training you would give to teachers at your center to inform them about ways to support language development. It seemed like a great assignment, but what students were producing was not very good because it wasn't very well thought out. It was missing a lot. So, and then here are things that I added, important points to cover in your training. So I wanted to make sure here are the skills that I wanted them to cover. And so here we go. Students might have the following questions. So you see it asks me all these questions, and here I am answering the questions. And then, but here's the thing is it's still not very smart. I didn't say, all right, integrate these into an assignment. So it started to say, okay, here's how it would help the student. I said, can you reimagine the assignment to include these details? And now I have a very clear assignment that specifies to students authentically how they could demonstrate this knowledge. So I went from this very simple assignment with these skills, it asked me questions, to a really good assignment that I am super excited about reading with my students. And then I cut and pasted it. I put it in a Word. I changed things around, and then I pasted it again. Said, here are the revisions that I made. I pasted it here. And now I said, okay, now I've revised it to be more appropriate. Create my rubric for me. And it created my rubric for me. And this is where I started using, by the way, the coding in ChatGPT with Canvas is super cool. If you haven't used that yet. Okay, so any questions, and we can experiment more?
What's the coding that you did? What was that? Was that where you did the HTML where you switched over and then you put that in and then it built it for you, or?
Yeah, so let's see. In Canvas, when you do a list, it does one, and then the sub bullet points is 1, 2, 3. It drives me crazy. So I wanted it to recode the HTML. So it was 1 and then the bullet points under it. So that's what I told it. I said,
Okay.
here it is. Give me the code to create the bullet points. And so I just cut and pasted this and put it back in, and it gave me an accessible list that started with 1, 2, 3, you know, whatever it is, 1, and then the subpoints were in bullets instead of 1, 2, 3. But it really does a good job of producing much better HTML. ChatGPT struggled with that for a lot of times, but this 4.0 with Canvas is helpful.
Yeah.
And I, in all honesty, I don't know. I pay for ChatGPT, so I don't know if this is available for everybody or not.
I don't think so.
So
it feels like to me, like with writing and thesis statement, that would be more of a formative assessment to help get them to the paper writing.
yeah,
And then with maybe even, because I would really, well, I mean, they have to learn how to write papers, but with ChatGPT and other things, like,
yeah, you have to get out. Okay, what truly is the skill? I mean, I don't envy the position of English teachers because this is so hard, but they don't have to write papers anymore because AI does it better and quicker. But they need to know how to critically think. So what are assessments, authentic assessments they can get at to make them critically think? I love the thought of writing an escape room because they need to be clear in their writing when they're writing those clues in this escape room. And you can ask it, okay, I don't know much about teaching thesis writing, but you can have those conversations back and forth to get to where you want to be.
those students are doing their own escape room. I have to see, I
Could
have
be.
to look at that.
Yeah, have a conversation. I know escape rooms are a big thing.
So
Oh, and I
what,
didn't even tell it right here. I said, this is
Okay.
great, but I didn't tell what. Let's see, can you create
yeah,
full assignment around an escape room? I want to focus on the skill of writing a thesis statement. Decoys included, and these are these detractors. It's harder to create detractors because you have to know what the skill is in order to do the detractor. And it always gives you the assessment criteria, but you want it to have a clear rubric. And you can adjust it however you want, and it'll make those changes. So you can say, this seems very comprehensive. And you break it down into parts that span a month. See what it does. Sometimes it'll do this. And this is where it's getting your feedback. This is where you're training it, by the way. So you know that, okay, this is a complicated task that you're asking it to do, and I'm help training AI. So you can see here, it's broken it down into the different weeks. So students need that format if that's what you want. Again, you can have that conversation. So I'm going to choose this one. I asked it to create a detailed rubric in the table format. I didn't give it any specifications, so I can say here are the different points of the rubric. And go through all that, and it cuts and pastes super easy onto a Word document.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. So we have 3 minutes left. Any questions? I really encourage you just to play around with AI to make all assessments more authentic. If you have one that you like, put it in there and say, how can I make this assessment more authentic? Minor tweaks can be a great way to start off on this project. Make sure you tell this is what I want to assess and help it create that rubric for you. I found sometimes, most of the times, it'll default to a assessment that is a little bit more complicated. So I've had to say, okay, this is an assessment that they need to accomplish in 1 week's time. It's associated with one module. I want them to be able to complete it in 1 week's time, bring down the complexity or whatever it might be. But those back and forths is where your critical thinking as the instructor is really invaluable to know, okay, this is too much to ask students to do in 1 week, or break this down into parts that they can submit, and give me assessment tools to help with, or feedback tools to help with each of the parts. It can do that as well. So you have those rubrics easily created that you can edit as needed or give to students.
Well, thank you, Amanda. This is great. And yeah, it's a lot of information, but really good. Really good.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and hope you have a great rest of your Monday.
Thank you, Amanda. Take care.
Thank you, Mohammed. Bye-bye.